Ron Howard, the man everyone calls the nicest guy in Hollywood, always smiling, always calm, always grateful. But what if I told you that reputation isn't the full story? Because for years, behind closed doors, Ron Howard has been keeping a secret list. A list of 7 actors he swore he would never work with again. And no, these aren't random names. These are Hollywood legends, people he once admired, trusted, even called friends. So what went wrong? What could possibly make Hollywood's kindest director say, never again? Well, it turns out some of these on-set experiences were pure chaos, egos, drama, betrayal, and one actor's meltdown that reportedly made Ron walk off set for the first time in his entire career. This is the side of Ron Howard the cameras never show, and once you hear these stories, you'll understand exactly why he drew the line. Now let's get into the 7 actors Ron Howard will never work with again. Number 7. Chevy Chase. The hurricane Ron Howard refused to touch. We're starting with someone Ron Howard didn't even need to work with to know he wanted nothing to do with him: Chevy Chase. Picture this. It's the late 1980 seconds. Universal Studios is putting together a big-budget comedy. They're thinking about who should direct it. Someone suggests Ron Howard. Perfect choice, right? The guy's talented, professional, and getting more successful every year. Then they mention the star, Chevy Chase. Ron Howard's answer was immediate. One word. No. Not, let me think about it. Not, send me the script. Just no. He didn't even want to take a meeting. He refused before the first conversation was even scheduled. When his longtime producer, Brian Grazer, asked why, Howard's response was brutally honest. I won't babysit a hurricane. Now, you might be wondering, why such a strong reaction? Howard hadn't even worked with the guy yet. But here's the thing. By that point, Chevy Chase's reputation in Hollywood was already legendary for all the wrong reasons. On Saturday Night Live back in the 70s, Chase had fought with almost every single cast member. Bill Murray famously got into a physical fight with him backstage. We're talking actual punches thrown. The tension was so bad that when Chase came back to host, the entire cast dreaded it. But it didn't stop there. Years later, when Chase joined the show Community, the same pattern repeated itself. He would storm off set without warning. He insulted writers to their faces. He called his co-stars lazy and unprofessional. Dan Harmon, the show's creator, eventually had enough and publicly called him out. Directors who had worked with Chase would quietly warn each other. Don't do it, they'd say. It's not worth the headache. Ron Howard heard all these stories, and he made a decision right then and there. Life's too short. Movies are hard enough to make without dealing with someone who turns every day into a nightmare. When Chevy Chase found out Howard had turned him down, he didn't take it well. At a Hollywood party, he reportedly mocked the director, saying something like, "Oh, Ron Howard only works with nice guys. Must be boring as hell making movies with him." Word got back to Howard. His response was ice cold and perfectly calculated. That's exactly the point. From that moment on, Chevy Chase's name became shorthand in Hollywood for everything Ron Howard avoided. Chaos. Drama. Unpredictability. The kind of energy that destroys a film from the inside out. Even decades later, when Community brought Chase's bad behavior back into the headlines, a reporter asked Howard if he'd ever consider directing him now. Maybe people change, right? Maybe Chase had mellowed out. Howard's answer came quick and clean. Some chaos isn't worth capturing on film, and that was that. Chevy Chase never got his shot with Ron Howard. And honestly, after hearing all this, can you blame him? Think about it. Would you want to work with someone who had that kind of track record? Let me know in the comments. Number 6. Hugh Grant, the polite smile that hid a sharp tongue. Now this next one surprised a lot of people. Hugh Grant seems like the perfect actor for a Ron Howard film, right? Charming, witty, that British accent that makes everything sound sophisticated. But behind the velvet suits and the polite smile, Hugh Grant had a sharp tongue. And when it came to Ron Howard, he wasn't afraid to use it. Their clash didn't happen on a movie set. It happened across boardroom tables and in Hollywood meetings back in the early 2000s. Howard was considering Grant for a romantic dramedy project under his production company, Imagine Entertainment. What should have been a friendly, creative conversation turned sour almost immediately. First, Hugh Grant showed up. Late. Not fashionably late. Just disrespectfully late. Then, as soon as he sat down, he started dismissing everything about the project. But it wasn't constructive criticism. It was condescension. "You Americans think emotion needs explosions," Grant reportedly said with this little smirk on his face. Ron Howard sat there, stone-faced, saying nothing. But Grant didn't stop. He went through Howard's script page by page, calling it too sentimental. He suggested that Hollywood studios, and by extension Howard, didn't understand real wit. Didn't understand subtlety. Didn't understand what good storytelling actually looked like. This wasn't banter between colleagues. This was one person talking down to another. And Ron Howard, the guy who directed some of the biggest films in Hollywood history, sat there and took it for a while. Finally, Howard closed his notebook, slowly, deliberately. He looked Grant right in the eye and said, "I think we're looking for different things." That single sentence ended the collaboration on the spot. The project moved forward, but with a different actor, and Ron Howard made sure Hugh Grant's name never crossed his production lists again. Years later, in interviews, Grant made comments about American directors being earnest to a fault. He never named names, but people in the industry knew exactly who he was talking about. Industry insiders said Howard was furious when he heard about it. The thing is, Ron Howard had built his entire career on being earnest, on caring about stories, on treating people with respect. And here was Hugh Grant, acting like that was somehow beneath him. So Howard made a quiet decision. Hugh Grant could take his charm and his accent and his condescending attitude somewhere else. There were plenty of talented actors in the world who didn't make you feel small for caring about your work. What do you think? Was Howard being too sensitive, or did Grant cross a line? Drop your thoughts below. Number 5. Marlon Brando. When meeting your hero becomes your worst nightmare. Now we're getting into the really heavy stories, because this next one involves a legend. I'm talking about Marlon Brando. One of the greatest actors who ever lived, the Godfather, A Streetcar Named Desire. The guy basically invented modern film acting. Ron Howard grew up watching Brando's films. He idolized him. So when the opportunity came to work together in the mid-1990 seconds, Howard was thrilled. This was a dream come true. It turned into a nightmare almost immediately. Marlon Brando arrived on set already in a bad mood. And from day one, he made it clear he wasn't interested in following anyone's rules. Not the schedule, not the script. Not even basic professional courtesy. Brando refused to memorize his lines. Not because he couldn't, he just didn't want to. Instead, the crew had to tape cue cards all around the set so he could glance at them during scenes. Imagine trying to create genuine emotion and connection in BS. A scene when your lead actor is literally reading off cards hidden behind your other actors. But it got worse. One afternoon, Brando stopped filming right in the middle of a take. He looked around, shook his head, and announced to everyone, "This dialogue is garbage. Rewrite it now." Ron Howard tried to reason with him, tried to explain why the scene was written the way it was, tried to find a compromise. Brando just smiled. Then he walked off set to his trailer and stayed there for 3 hours. When he finally came back, he had decided something. His character needed a new accent. Never mind that they'd already filmed half his scenes. Never mind that it made no sense for the story. Brando wanted to do it differently, so that's what was happening. The cameras rolled, and nobody, not even Ron Howard, had any idea what Brando was going to do. Howard is famous for his patience. Ask anyone in Hollywood, the man doesn't lose his cool. But working with Brando was testing him in ways he'd never experienced before. In private conversations with his crew, Howard finally let his frustration show. "This isn't acting," he said. "This is sabotage. Think about that for a second." Ron Howard, the ultimate professional, felt like one of his actors was actively sabotaging the film. Weeks went by. The situation didn't improve. In fact, it got worse. Brando's unpredictability wrecked the shooting schedule. Every day they fell further behind. The budget spiraled out of control. Studio executives were calling, demanding answers. And Howard was left trying to hold everything together while his lead actor treated the entire production like a joke. Eventually, the project collapsed entirely. It just fell apart. All that work, all that money, all those people's time, gone. Ron Howard left that experience humiliated and exhausted. He never mentioned Marlon Brando's name publicly again. But people who knew him said something had changed. The dream of working with his hero had turned into one of the worst experiences of his career. And it taught him something important. Genius and madness aren't the same thing. And sometimes, the legends you admire from afar should stay there. Do you have a hero who disappointed you when you met them? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Number 4. Mel Gibson, the Oscar winner who wanted to control everything. By 1996, Mel Gibson was at the peak of his power. He'd just won Oscars for Braveheart. He was one of the biggest stars in the world. So when Ron Howard cast him in Ransom, it seemed like a perfect match. It wasn't. From the moment cameras started rolling, this became a battle for control. Ron Howard's scripts were famously tight. Every scene carefully planned, every shot thought through. He ran a precise, organized set because that's how great films get made. Mel Gibson tore that order apart. Gibson didn't just want to act in the film, he wanted to command it. He questioned the lighting. He rewrote lines in the middle of scenes. He gave directions to other actors. He essentially tried to become a second director on a film where he wasn't the director. Ron Howard's approach to directing is collaborative. He listens to actors. He values their input. But there's a difference between collaboration and someone trying to take over your film. One day, the tension finally exploded. Witnesses say Mel Gibson slammed his script down on the table and shouted, "I know what the audience wants. I won an Oscar for it." The set went silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Ron Howard looked at Gibson. His voice was quiet, but every word cut like a knife. "You're not the director of this one, Mel." The air went ice cold. From that moment on, every single scene felt like a duel. Gibson refused to do multiple takes, claiming that spontaneity made his performance more real. Howard, not trusting that Gibson would give him what he needed, started shooting backup footage without telling him. The tension spread through the entire crew. People started taking sides. The energy on set went from creative to toxic. Universal executives had to visit twice just to keep things from completely falling apart. When Ransom finally wrapped, you could see the exhaustion on everyone's faces. Not the good kind of tired you get from hard work. The drained, emotionally spent kind of tired that comes from constant conflict. The movie turned out great. Critics loved it. Audiences loved it. It made money. But Ron Howard later called it the most draining project of my life. Mel Gibson publicly praised the film in interviews, but he never mentioned Ron Howard's name again. And Howard never cast Gibson in another project. Sometimes, even when the final product is successful, the journey to get there just isn't worth repeating. What's your take? Should directors have total control, or should actors have more say? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Number 3. Tom Cruise. When intensity meets discipline now. We're getting into the big names. Tom Cruise, one of the biggest movie stars of all time. You'd think directing him would be amazing, right? Well, in 1992, Ron Howard found out that sometimes intense and amazing don't go together. They teamed up for the epic film Far and Away. On paper, it was a dream pairing. Tom Cruise was riding high after Top Gun and Born on the 4th of July. Ron Howard was earning massive respect as a director who prized discipline and detail. But from the very beginning, their visions clashed. Tom Cruise wanted every single movement to explode with emotion. He wanted intensity in every frame. He wanted the audience to feel everything his character felt at maximum volume. Ron Howard, on the other hand, wanted silence, patience, precision. He believed real emotion came from restraint, not from constantly turning the dial to 11. Their approaches couldn't have been more different. One afternoon in Dublin, they were filming a rain-soaked sequence. Ireland was. Pouring down rain, the crew was cold and wet, and they were trying to capture this pivotal moment in the film. Tom Cruise suddenly stopped in the middle of a take. He threw off his gloves and barked at Howard, "This doesn't feel real." Ron Howard's face froze. The entire crew went dead silent. Howard looked at Cruise and said simply and calmly, "Real isn't about noise, Tom." That moment became legendary on set. People still talk about it today. Nicole Kidman, who was also in the film and standing right between them, tried to calm things down. It didn't work. From that point forward, Tom Cruise started rewriting blocking. He demanded retakes over and over. He argued that scenes needed more blood, more intensity, more raw emotion, not the calm, controlled approach Howard wanted. Howard's smile, that famous Ron Howard smile that everyone knew, faded. He stopped trying to compromise and started shooting extra coverage. Why? Because he didn't trust Cruise to give the same performance. Twice. Think about that. A director feeling like he can't trust his lead actor to be consistent. That's a massive problem. Months after filming wrapped, a reporter asked Ron Howard about working with Tom Cruise. His answer was diplomatic but telling. Some people confuse passion with chaos, and he never cast Tom Cruise again. Now, to be fair to Cruise, his intensity has created some of the most incredible performances and films in cinema history. The Mission Impossible series, Jerry Maguire, Eyes Wide Shut. The guy is talented beyond measure. But talent alone doesn't mean two people can work together. Sometimes creative visions are just too different, and that's okay. It doesn't make either person wrong, it just makes them incompatible. Have you ever had a coworker where you just couldn't find a rhythm? Where, no matter how hard you both tried, you just couldn't make it work? That's what happened here. Number 2. Jim Carrey, the green monster that nearly stole Ron Howard's sanity. Ron Howard once joked that how the Grinch stole Christmas nearly stole his sanity. He wasn't exaggerating. What started as a magical Christmas project in 2000 turned into one of the most chaotic, frustrating, absolutely maddening experiences of Ron Howard's entire career. And it was all because of Jim Carrey. Now, let me be clear. Jim Carrey is brilliant. The man's a comedic genius. His physical comedy, his facial expressions, his ability to transform into characters is unmatched. But on the set of The Grinch, that brilliance came with a price. From the very first week, the production descended into chaos. Jim Carrey had to spend 8 hours every single day getting into costume. 8 hours. Layers and layers of latex and fur glued to his skin. Prosthetics covering his face. Green makeup everywhere. By the third day, he was completely losing it. He started snapping at everyone. Makeup artists, production assistants, other actors, even Ron Howard himself. One morning became infamous. Among the crew, Jim Carrey stormed off the set, screaming at the top of his lungs, "You try acting inside a rubber coffin." Ron Howard tried to calm him down, tried to be understanding. After all, 8 hours of makeup every day would drive anyone crazy. But Carrey's rage didn't stop there. He started improvising entire scenes without any warning. He'd change dialogue in the middle of a take. Sometimes he'd throw the script on the floor in frustration and just do whatever he felt like doing. One crew member described working on that set as walking on broken glass. Nobody knew when Carrey would explode next. Nobody knew if he'd show up in a good mood or a terrible one. The entire production lived in constant tension. Ron Howard's famous calm started to crack. He quietly called a meeting with Universal executives. He explained that the production was spiraling out of control. Something had to change, or the movie might not get finished at all. The studio made a wild decision. They brought in a Navy SEAL survival expert. Yes, you read that right, a Navy SEAL. The same man who trained soldiers to survive torture was brought in to train Jim Carrey how to endure wearing the Grinch costume. Think about that for a second. The situation got so bad that they needed someone who specialized in extreme survival training just to keep their lead actor from quitting. It worked, kind of. Carrey finished the movie, but the damage was done. By the time filming ended, Ron Howard looked exhausted in every behind-the-scenes photo. His eyes were tired, his smile was forced. When reporters asked him about Jim Carrey, He'd smile politely and say something diplomatic like, "He brought a lot of energy." But privately, to people he trusted, Howard admitted the truth. "The shoot aged me years." The movie became a Christmas classic. Kids love it. Families watch it every year. It made a fortune at the box office. But for Ron Howard, the success wasn't worth what it took to get there. He never worked with Jim Carrey again. Never even considered it. Because some experiences, no matter how successful the result, are just too painful to repeat. If you made it this far, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let's see how many of you are still with me on this wild journey through Hollywood drama. Number 1. Russell Crowe, the volatile genius who broke Ron Howard's calm. We've reached number 1, the actor who tested Ron Howard more than any other. The man who took Ron's legendary patience and shattered it completely. Russell Crowe. Now, Ron Howard and Russell Crowe made 2 films together, A Beautiful Mind and Cinderella Man. A Beautiful Mind won Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Howard. It was a triumph, so you'd think their partnership was great, right? Wrong. Ron Howard once called Cinderella Man the toughest film of my life. And the reason had a name, Russell Crowe. From day one of their partnership, tension simmered beneath the surface. Russell Crowe walked onto film sets not like an actor ready to take direction, but like a general ready for war. He wanted control, he wanted command, and he wanted confrontation. Everything Ron Howard spent his career avoiding. During A Beautiful Mind, they'd already clashed quietly over creative decisions. Crowe had opinions about everything. He'd question Howard's choices. He'd push back, but they managed to keep it professional enough to get through the film. Then came Cinderella Man in 2004. That movie turned their simmering tension into open hostility. Russell Crowe challenged every single choice Ron Howard made. The lighting? Wrong. The pacing? Wrong. Even camera placement? Wrong. In the middle of filming one brutal boxing sequence, Crowe stopped everything. He looked across the ring at Ron Howard and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "You don't understand the character's pain." Ron Howard stared back, silent, furious. After that day, the crew whispered among themselves. It felt like watching 2 titans trying to outwill each other. The set grew heavier each week. The energy became toxic. Everyone could feel it. Crowe insisted on reshooting entire monologues because he didn't believe the emotion was right. Never mind that they were on a tight schedule. Never mind that every reshoot cost time and money. If Russell Crowe wasn't satisfied, nobody was moving forward. Ron Howard fought to keep the schedule from completely collapsing, but it was like trying to build a house during an earthquake. In private conversations with producers, Howard said something that perfectly captured the experience. Directing Russell Crowe feels like riding a bull while trying to build a church. Think about that image. You're trying to create something beautiful, something meaningful, something carefully constructed. But you're doing it while holding on for dear life to something wild and unpredictable that might throw you off at any moment. Even after Cinderella Man earned critical praise and recognition, even after the movie proved to be powerful and moving, Ron Howard refused to work with Russell Crowe again. Reporters kept asking about another collaboration. Fans wanted to see them team up again. After all, A Beautiful Mind won Oscars and Cinderella Man was critically acclaimed. Surely they could make more magic together. Howard's answer never changed. Once was enough. Well, technically twice was enough, but you get the point. Russell Crowe later admitted in interviews that their methods were too different to ever blend properly. And honestly, at least he had that self-awareness. Some actors and directors are like oil and water. It doesn't matter how talented they both are. It doesn't matter how successful the movies turn out to be. The process itself is just too painful, too difficult, too exhausting to ever want to repeat. And for Ron Howard, Russell Crowe represented that lesson in its purest form. The bigger picture, so there you have it. 7 stars. 7 stories. 7 reasons why even Hollywood's nicest man learned to draw lines in the sand. Russell Crowe, the volatile genius who turned filmmaking into warfare. Jim Carrey, the brilliant comedian whose Green Grinch almost turned Howard green with frustration. Tom Cruise, whose intensity clashed with Howard's precision. Mel Gibson, the Oscar winner who wanted to control everything. Marlon Brando, the legend who turned a dream into a nightmare. Hugh Grant, whose charming condescension hid a sharp disrespect. And Chevy Chase, the Hurricane Ron Howard, was smart enough to avoid altogether. But here's what makes this story really interesting. Ron Howard isn't the bad guy in any of these situations. And honestly, most of these actors aren't really villains either. They're just people with strong, creative visions who couldn't find a way to work together. Some were going through personal struggles. Some had methods that didn't mesh. Some just had personalities that sparked conflict instead of collaboration. The real lesson here isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about knowing yourself well enough to recognize when a partnership won't work. It's about having the courage to walk away from situations that will drain you, even if they might be successful. Ron Howard built one of the most respected careers in Hollywood by being kind, professional, and collaborative. But he also built it by knowing when to say no. By understanding that some chaos isn't worth capturing on film, these 7 actors taught him that lesson. And honestly, we should all be a little more like Ron Howard in that way. Know your limits. Recognize toxic situations. And don't be afraid to walk away, even from big names and big opportunities, if the cost to your peace of mind is too high. So which of these 7 stories shocked you the most? Did you have any idea Ron Howard had dealt with all this behind the scenes? And here's the real question. Do you think he was right to cut these actors off? Or do you think his ego got in the way of potentially great films? I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below and let's have a real conversation about this. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you're awesome. Seriously. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next deep dive into Hollywood's secrets. Because trust me, we're just getting started.